Good evening, everyone. I'm Liveryman Peter Singleton. I retired recently, having completed 45 years in the packaging industry, covering manufacturing, converting, and retail, with nearly 20 years with Marks and Spencer, and my last 15 years as a principal scientist and engineer with Gillette. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the next of our Stationers Industry Committee seminars. This one on the topic of packaging and perceptions of sustainability in association with the BPIF Cartons Group. An introduction for those of you who don't know us. The Stationers Company dates back more than 600 years. In all that time, communication has been at the heart of what our members do. First, as members of a guild, and then from 1557 as members of the Stationers Livery Company. Beginning with quill and ink and moving through printing of books, pamphlets, almanacs and newspapers, and including in modern times, paper, print, publishing, packaging, office products, broadcasting, online media and design. Most members are or have been involved in one of these communications and content media. This evening we will focus on packaging and specifically one of the current hot topics, sustainability. Our chairman for this evening is Martin Kirsch. Martin is Executive Director of the Food Services Packaging Association, which represents about 200 manufacturers and distributors of packaging for the UK's takeaway, catering and restaurant sectors. He liaises with the UK, devolved and local governments on a range of issues including waste management, litter, packaging recycling and recovery. He's also actively involved with the UK government in developing its ongoing policy regarding packaging. Before I hand over to Martin, a couple of housekeeping comments. Firstly, the seminar is being recorded and all those who have registered will receive the link to this recording after the meeting. And secondly, the panel will be taking questions. So if you have a question, please post it using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Martin will pick up these questions after the discussions. So, over to our chairman, Martin Kirsch.
Well, thank you, Peter. What a splendid introduction. Thank you so much, and thank you, Stationers, for setting all of this up. And also, I should put in a plug for the sponsors, who I know, BPIF Cartons, for enabling it all to come together. Our theme for tonight is packaging and perceptions of sustainability, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But just to say, we have an absolutely fantastic panel to discuss this very issue. I mean, really, genuinely, some of the leading names in packaging, representing producers of paper and board, producers of plastic packaging, and a world-renowned, I will build them up, authority in all things compostable and bio-based. So the panel members are, you should be able to see on your screen, and I won't do from left to right because I'm sure it's all jumbled up in different order on your screen, is we have Johan Granis and Stefan Soberg from Iggesund, who produce paper and paperboard. We have Helen Roberts, who is CEO of Robinson's PLC, a mere 150 years old. That's CEO, that's Robinson's, not Helen, and they produce a plastic packaging range and rigid boxes. We have Richard Bracewell, who's Marketing Director of James Cropper PLC, and James Cropper can show up Robinson because they are 156 years old and are very, very well known for their luxury packaging papers. And then David Newman, who's Managing Director of the Bio-Based and Biodegradables Industry Association, known by most of us as the BBIA, representing companies involved in the production of biodegradable polymers. and finished products for the benefit of the environment, to quote from their website. The idea is I'm just going to give a little bit of background, then each of our speakers will then speak for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to invite you to ask questions, and I'll come to that in a moment. So back to the theme of the evening, packaging and perceptions of sustainability. Now, as always, a bit like answering an exam question, the definitions are pretty key. I'm going to assume that everybody in the audience is pretty good to go as far as packaging is concerned. But this word sustainability, in my experience, it is a word which is often greatly abused, often exploited without any thought to what it truly means. Because it sounds good, doesn't it? You know, we are the most sustainable, whatever it is. And, you know, I see it on websites, and I see the name used for products ranging from concrete and marble. And there are marble producers saying how sustainable they are. So from them right the way through to fish and chips, it is bandied around. And so if everybody and every company is sustainable, how come people feel we have an environmental crisis on our hands? The two don't really stack up. For definitions, I usually go, along with most people, to the Brundtland Commission, which issued a statement in 1983, which talks about development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is a pretty standard definition used by lots of people in the environment sector. And it applies not just to environment, but also to society and to the economy. That's in itself is quite interesting, because as a society, we have great ambitions to improve our well-being. So really you have to think, well, perhaps our goals exceed our needs, and Brundtland referred to needs, but if we're improving our quality of life and we want to improve socially, perhaps that requires increased demands for goods and services globally. So does it all stack up? So by way of background, that's something to think of. You are going to hear quite a few terms tonight, and they will cover things. I'm certainly not going to explain each one of them, because each one of them in their own right can take a long time to deal with. But terms such as circular economy, that will be bandied around. Packaging's role in reducing food waste. You will no doubt hear about carbon reduction, recycling, reuse, composting, municipal waste management and local authorities, litter, undoubtedly, be it on land or in water, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, new and alternative bio-based materials and research, changing patterns of consumption, particularly more recently, the huge growth in home delivery, safety and hygiene, which has come much more to the fore with COVID, resource provenance, and government reforms, both in the UK, the devolved nations, because environment is devolved to Scotland, Wales, and North Ireland, and of course in the EU. What I am going to stress is that this session is absolutely not about claiming one material is better than another. And we really don't want to hear questions or speeches which say, I'm superior to this. It's not about that. So I'm hoping we'll keep it in the spirit of the theme of the day. So what I'm going to do is ask each of our speakers to talk for 5 minutes, to say what the subject title means to them, in the context of their organization. And I know even at this early stage, that's going to bring out a lot of the themes I've mentioned above. While they're doing that, I really would like you, and this is not going to be work without your participation, to think about, you know, your own businesses, and to think about sort of and your own personal experiences, and to start thinking about questions you want to ask and scribble those down. I think there is a Q&A button to put, if you really do, we really do rely on you putting those questions in the Q&A. Please say who you are as well when you put the question down, and then we'll get to hopefully cover most of the questions if we can. So in order, we're going to start off with Staffan and Jonas, who are going to split their 5 minutes, I hope, between them. So over to you two guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Yeah, we'll split it. And I think I'm glad that you raised the issue here with the historical aspect, because sustainability, being sustainable, means basically also to be there for the future, to take responsible for the future. And I can just say that I think we're beating both of the others here. With our company was founded in 1685, so that I think is 336 years. I think we have. If we then get back to the topic at hand, when we look at sustainable packaging from our side, I think something that has really popped up lately is the great interest in paper packaging, which is what we are working with in terms of the forestry part. And then our company owns about 1.4 million hectares of land. That makes us one of the largest landowners in Europe. And for our sake, for our part, I think that is something that has really become a large interest lately, and something that I think is very important that we are able to talk about. Where does paper packaging originate from?
Yeah, and the increased interest in these matters has changed a lot over time. In the middle of the 80s, the Swedish Forest Industry Association started to have seminars on greenhouse gases and possible climate change. And when we tried to bring that out to our customers, they didn't listen, or they didn't want to hear. Now, today, over the years, this has evolved in a way that first of all, we had a lot of people asking questions, and then we knew that they were ticking boxes in a questionnaire. Today, the knowledge among our customers about these issues, I would say today, mostly wood sourcing and carbon dioxide, it has grown. And at some of our customers, it's even so that the fastest growing part of the company is the sustainability department. But what's good about it is that we are getting a better dialogue, and it also has provided us with more resources to be able to explain and also sometimes even defend our case.
Martin is in shock. We made it in 5 minutes.
I know you made it. I know I can give you another minute if there's anything more you want to add. If not, I'm going to pass over to Helen. I see a nod. So
Martin, do you want me to carry on?
oh yes, please. Sorry, that was me segueing you in there. Sorry.
Sorry, apologies.
Seamless.
So, Helen Roberts, and my involvement in packaging and sustainability really dates back to about 2004, when I was working at Marks and Spencer's, similar to Peter. Spent many years at M&S and was part of the team that developed the Plan A sustainability strategy at the business, and responsible packaging was a key part of that element of it back in 2004. And very much focused on launching new products like rPET at the time, working with very forward-thinking councils like the Kent Council and the Somerset Councils, and packaging converters to create an absolute supply chain to getting more recycled material into plastics, and not thinking of it as waste management, but thinking of establishing a supply chain for the material. Since 2011, I've worked in packaging companies where sustainability has been a key part of the business strategy, whether that's in cardboard, rigid or flexible plastic packaging. I think what it taught me in working up and down that supply chain is just the importance of really clear direction, and absolutely the need for collaboration. So I joined Robinson just over a year ago as the CEO. We're a small cap business listed on the AIM market, and we make both rigid plastic and paperboard packaging. And we have manufacturing sites both in the UK and Poland. And sustainability is really key to our business. You know, we're essentially a plastics packaging company. And I'm not talking about that from a risk management perspective, but one more of opportunity. We have a very clear sustainability pledge, and that's underpinned by goals, metrics, and they form part of our ESG metrics. They sit in our annual reports, and I spend an equal amount of time in talking about those and as I do my financial metrics when I'm talking to investors. So it just goes to show, actually, even in the last 5 years, just how important sustainability is to the investment community, to our businesses and our industry. And those metrics, we link them to the UN sustainability goals because that's a framework that most people have some, understanding of, and believe that they're a way of articulating what we're trying to achieve in a clear manner that can also be measured. The goals, some of our goals are incredibly ambitious. We want to fundamentally change our business model and align it to that of the circular economy. And actually, how do we become carbon positive by 2030? And I joined the COP26 presentations recently with both the UK government and Prince Charles, and really just how to be very ambitious in this area, and just how important it is to our business going forwards. I think the final point I want to make on what it means to me is that our pledge is not just to focus on the environment, but it's also around our people, the people whom we employ and the communities in which we operate. I mean, that's a really key part, and especially over the last year, what we've seen with the pandemic, just ensuring that our people thrive, not just survive, in the last 12 months has been absolutely critical. So, and that's absolutely integral to our strategy. And our strategy is very simple. It's to grow our business sustainably. It's putting our customers first, and it's ensuring our people thrive. And that's all underpinned by the pledge.
Excellent, thank you. God, everybody's finishing on time. This is wonderful. Right, in which case then let's go over to Richard.
Hi, thanks, Martin. Yeah, so Richard Bracewell. As Martin said, I'm the marketing director at James Cropper. James Cropper, we're founded in 1845, and we are a 6th generation family run business. We are a paper mill, albeit we are actually broader than that. We're a material specialist. So the bit I'm responsible for is paper and paper that we supply for packaging and all other sorts, including stationery. But we're also involved in supplying materials for renewable energy, in hydrogen, fuel cells, etc. And recently, we looked again at the why. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? And had an exercise involving all the people throughout the company, and we came up with that our purpose is pioneering materials to safeguard our future. So that's why we exist. And this is something that I think really now we see it very much drives us. We've often said sustainability is really important to us, but we've really explored it now more and what it really means. It was interesting just picking up on what Helen said. I think it's more than just the environment. The environment is incredibly important for us. We are based on the edge of the Lake District, a national park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's really important that we safeguard our local environment, but our community as well. We within the paper world, we're a relatively small paper mill, but we employ about 600 people. Most of those people are from within our local community. And so a sustainable business is really important. We provide a lot of jobs for people, for families in the area. And, again, exactly as Helen said, I mean, during this pandemic, I think we've realized, how important that is. when I talk about the environment, we take our water for our paper making, or we borrow our water from our paper making from the River Kent, which is one of the cleanest rivers in the country. It's a site of special scientific interest. It's one of the few rivers in the country that has crayfish, and we're a mill, we're a manufacturing plant. So we've recognized for a long time it's really important we put back what we take out. We put it back, if we can, even cleaner than when we took it out. I think in terms of the products we produce, we supply paper for packaging for luxury goods, premium goods, for shopping bags, for cartons, for beauty and cosmetics. One of the areas where we've seen a significant growth in demand is for recovered fibre, for taking waste and upcycling it. And back in 2017, we started taking used coffee cups and upcycling coffee cups into papers. So, for example, the carrier bags and the boxes that Burberry have are made using paper from used coffee cups or upcycled coffee cups. Actually, within the stationery world, we supply Hallmark, so greeting cards made from used coffee cups as well. And this is something, you know, we don't have our own forest that we use a lot of responsibly sourced pulp from forests in Europe, but the closer to home that we can take our raw materials from, better. And so creating our own upcycled pulp from what was regarded as waste previously is really important to us. And so that's an area that we're focused on seeing if we can grow that. And it's very much something that our customers are demanding. And I think on that point, you know, I guess my final point really would be, you can't do this alone. You can only do this in partnership. And the coffee cup recycling has been a great example. We couldn't do that without the coffee retailers, the chains that you all know very well. We couldn't do that without the waste management companies. And in fact, you know, we've worked very closely with Martin as well on that with the industry bodies. So, you know, no matter how big or small you are, you can't do this alone. It's all about partnerships and working together.
That's terrific, Richard. Thank you. Now I'm going to hand you over to the very capable hands of David. If you unmute, perfect.
I don't know if you can see the screen there, Martin. What I'm going to, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Okay.
Perfectly.
I'm different to the speakers before me, ladies and gentlemen, because I represent associations and I do policy work. So I don't have a company behind me that's hundreds of years old, even though I feel that myself sometimes. So I do the policy work, and I really took up Martin's challenge this evening to firstly talk to you about what I think is happening in the world of sustainability and why there's a lot of confusion. And I'm really not going to talk in this moment about what I think compostables are and their role. And it's quite surprising when you look around the world and when you read, as Martin said, your newspapers, you wonder why the world's in such a mess when everybody is working on sustainability. Everybody is perfect. Everybody is green. And you have to ask yourself, how come we're in such a mess? And Martin did, and I do all the time. I've been doing environmental work since the late 1980s. And when people talk about materials, and we're talking about packaging today, you know, there's aluminium and glass, paper and plastics, and my own little world of bioplastics. And everybody's got their own story, you know, sustainable forests and easy to recycle and, you know, multi-recycling, lightweighting and everything. All perfect. Everyone's doing a great job. But then when you delve into these things, you realize that actually behind the scenes, we're not really all telling the truth. Aluminium, highly recyclable, 1% of all world's greenhouse gas emissions and responsible for loads of deforestation. Glass, Not a lot, but 4 million tons of CO2 emissions in the EU alone. Now, they don't tell you that. Perhaps it's inevitable. Perhaps that's just the way it is. But let's tell ourselves the truth. Is this sustainable? Our friends from Sweden in the paper industry won't be happy to see this, but I was a pulp and paper trader in my first years after university for 10 years. And so I know the industry quite well, and was personally responsible for the first exports from the Amazon rainforest, to my shame. And so whilst we have sustainable forestry management up in Scandinavia and in Canada and other parts of the world, the pulp and paper industry has led to the destruction of tropical rainforests from Indonesia, where this photo is. And those statistics are from right the way through Africa and Latin America. Is this sustainable? And that's not even talking about CO2 emissions and toxicity. And of course, plastics. I mean, I feel sorry for Helen working in the plastics industry at the moment. It's a hard sell, because with consumers, they see these statistics here. Only 9% is recycled. Plastics is in our food, in our bodies. And the greenhouse gas emissions from plastic production are racing up and will be a very significant part of greenhouse gas emissions over the next few decades. Again, is this sustainable? My little industry here makes compostable plastics. It relies upon composting. It relies upon food waste and bio waste being collected. We know full well that apart from very, very few places in the world, that is not happening. So are they creating customer confusion and consumer confusion? Is this sustainable? Now, I'm not going to go on with any more slides here, because Martin suggested that we will have another opportunity to talk further. But I would argue that when we talk about sustainability, we often don't have the conversation all the way through. We tell only a part of the story that we want to tell. And that hinders real progress.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks for putting that perspective as well. So a lot of information you've just received. Quite a few questions are coming in now, which is terrific. I'm just going to start, and because I need to try and work out these questions. Some of them are, it would be terrific if you could keep the questions relatively short, actually. Some of them are pages long. I'm sure you must be just cutting and pasting from your previous webinar. Let me just ask, and it picks up on something David has said, to Stefan, Jonas, and Helen. I mean, there are big carbon reduction targets the world is setting for itself, and we're going to certainly hear more about these later on in the year. I mean, how big a role does packaging have in helping the world reach those targets? And will all of this regulation we're hearing about, reading about, EU wanting to ban certain things, will it make a noticeable difference? Will it make any contribution towards reaching the big targets? Horrible question, I know.
Yeah, you're really selling it there, Martin.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that, I mean, the question on our side, I think that in one way you could argue that if you look at how to change energy systems to get away from fossil energy all across the world, and in that sense, I guess that packaging is a small part, absolutely. But on the other hand, we are a part of society. Packaging is something that every person basically around the world is meeting in his daily life. So in that sense, it is a big part of society, and as such, we need to power ahead, and we need to make sure that we do our part, or more than our part. So I think that if you look in absolute numbers, absolutely, I'm sure there are a bunch of industries that are much worse than us. But on the other hand, if we are to be and be perceived as sustainable, we need to do our part. We need to clean up our act, and we need to set an example and make people. I see several people here in the Q&A are asking about the perception of packaging, that people see packaging as a bad thing, and whilst a lot of the environmental load really in goods is producing the actual goods. So any spoils or any waste in the supply chain, that's really where a lot of the environmental load is. So I think we have an important role both in reducing packaging as such, but also protecting goods throughout a supply chain.
You know, just build on that, just touching, I think packaging does touch everyone's lives, as Johan said. And I think it's not just that each of us should achieve our own targets and make a difference to our own emissions, but also we have an opportunity to protect and provide this sort of positive intervention in the supply chain. You know, the packaging can actually protect the remaining carbon. Circa 95% of the carbon in foods is from the rearing or the growing and on all the processes that go through to achieving food production and bringing food to people's plates. And packaging can play a real part in protecting that, or even positive interventions by extending shelf life, for example, that helps protect that food, which is hugely important, both on a social level, but also from a carbon perspective. I think if you look at reductions in packaging usage, I think there's always going to be a place for that. I think we've seen that over the last 20, 30 years about how much packaging has become more efficient, just by looking at the weights of packaging being used over the last few decades. But if you say packaging is what, circa 5 to 9% of the carbon footprint of a product, and you focus all your energy to reduce that amount of carbon, then you're going to limit yourselves. And I think we should think in a much more broader system way around the product and the packaging together.
Thank you, Helen. And you've touched on a couple of things there, which I think might well come into the next question, which I'm going to ask to David and Richard. Is recycling still relevant? Because, as you know, a number of the NGOs put recycling at the bottom of their priority. So is recycling still relevant, or is this all about now moving towards reuse and reduction as the only means of achieving environmental improvement of packaging? David, do you want to, whichever, who would like to go first? Do fight amongst
Please, Richard, go first.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, my view is they're all relevant, and I think reduction, reuse, recycling in that order is probably the right way to approach this. But from putting myself, on the paper side, there are lots of things that people still need paper for, and people will still need paper for. If paper has an end of life, it is one of the most recycled materials. If we can take products that have reached an end of life and they can't be reused, and we can upcycle them and use them again, then absolutely, I think that's a good thing. And that's, by doing that, not only are we, the alternatives for those may be landfill or incineration. If we can upcycle them to use again, I think that's a very positive thing to do. Also, as I've mentioned before, it gives the opportunity of sourcing a raw material locally rather than sourcing a raw material that you have to transport thousands of miles. But I think they're all important.
Thank you. And David?
Let me share again another slide with the audience to perhaps give a little bit of a better idea of what I'm talking about here. As you know, Martin, but the rest of the audience don't know, I worked for Greenpeace for many, many years. And so, I've come at a lot of these questions over the years from an environmental point of view. And it's one of the reasons why I got involved in food waste, etc. And this is where we want to be going, this big butterfly diagram done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which sort of shows out a route forward. And our governments around the world are working on creating these circular economy models whereby materials are shared, first of all. They are maintained to prolong their life. They are reused. They're refurbished. They're remanufactured, and then finally they're recycled. And of course, as Richard has just said, we need to do all of these things. On the left-hand side, you have the biocycle. So that is materials which go back to soil. This is where my little world of compostables fit in. But food waste, for example, put it back to soil, put it back to making biogas, recycle it into farming from where these materials have come. This is what we all want to be doing. And this is what the good people sitting around this panel are all doing. The problem is, Martin, look at the right side of my screen. You've just seen the Circularity Gap report published at Davos in January. Actually, we're going backwards. This is happening at a global level, less and less and less. We are now, what, 91% linear, not 91% circular, we're 91% linear. So whilst we here are all trying to do the right thing, this is actually not happening on a global scale very much at all. If you want, I will cease there. Is that a dog?
Yeah, who's
boring a dog to death?
Who let the dogs out? Right.
He's listening to me and he's protesting.
Right. No, excellent.
So if you want, I can go on, but if you want, I can come back to what the solutions are. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic, David, because I think a lot of this is going to come into some of these questions which we've now got. So I'm going to. Am I reading, Lucy? Am I reading these out? Or are you going to these very fine people like Michael Clark?
You can read them out.
I can read them, right. This is from Michael Clark, and I don't know where Michael Clark works or not, where he works rather. He's referring here to Einstein, who famously said, facts are facts, perception is reality. How does the packaging industry address this essential dilemma where there are more facts than consumer perceptions? And I guess, gosh, that's kind of a difficult question, but I think what we have to also think about here is how do we bring the consumer into the equation, and is everything down to the producers in achieving these improvements, or does the public have a role, and how are you going to get the public to fulfill that role? So quite a lot in there. Anybody want to open the batting on this one? Right, well, I'm going to nominate. I tell you what, let me start with David, because I think you can pick it up from here. I know then on to Helen.
It's quite a broad and difficult question. Listen, I'll be quite honest with you. I don't give a hoot about consumers, and you're going to go, oh my God, what has he just said? I hope they're not recording this. I don't give a hoot about consumers, because you can teach consumers to do anything. You can teach people to stop smoking. You can teach people to put their seatbelts on. You can teach people to do anything, okay? What you need is the systems which enable people to do the right thing. If we walk around Scandinavia, we will see extraordinarily small amounts of littering compared to if we walk around the UK. Why? They have deposit return schemes. They have systems worked out for this. All this costs money. And the route through to sustainability, the route through to the perception of doing the right thing is financial. And I was going to come to this in my last slide, and that is that it is the cost of doing things which determines whether something is done right or something is done wrong. Therefore, it's the amount of money we put into the systems to get them right. We can collect 100% of plastic. We can collect 100% of aluminium or paper if we want to, if we make sure that the manpower there in the system is there to do it. But the problem is that we tend not to do that.
But we have, people have bins at home. They are asked to put the recycling stuff in the recycling bin, the non-recycle in the other bin, and maybe they have several bins, and some of them even have food waste bins. But we know from research, and Helen, perhaps you can pick up on this, that only a proportion of the population truly engages in this. Now, I'm not sure this is financial. Why doesn't more people fully engage in this?
If you come from a UK perspective and you segment the population out, and these figures haven't changed significantly in the last 20 years, approximately 11% of people will go out of their way to live in a truly sustainable way. They'll make a real effort to do it. 25% of people will do it if it's made easy and simple for them. The trick we've got to find is for the remaining population is how do we get everybody engaged to feel this is really important to do. And I think the consumer does have a part to play. You can't create a circular economy and change it from our current linear model if you don't have that ability to get those materials back and usable in a sustainable way, back into making more resources. Sure, there are things that we can do that are easier, and I think David is absolutely right. Putting the systems in place, and you can see that across country. You don't need to go to Sweden to see that. You can go to Wales and see a very cohesive approach, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a very different approach because everybody does it in the same way, and that's managed in a central approach, or it's directed from a central perspective compared to every local or county council having an individual approach within England. So, you can see cohesiveness, simplicity, clearly communicated, and David's right, put some money in to create a system will help to drive recycling, because what it does is it makes it easier, and it it makes it easier for those consumers to carry out their part in this. And I think that is absolutely crucial. Why we believe that litter is, socially acceptable, never mind the waste of resources that could quite easily go back into making more items in a circular way, is quite a big, it's quite a big point for all of us.
Well, what a great...
Can I just add there? Sorry, Martin. Helen's absolutely right. Helen's got it right because it invested a lot of money in it.
Right, could have sworn I was chairing this, David. Can I bring in the eager son too, please? Because David, and I will give you a reference there, mentioned Sweden, mentioned the lack of litter. Are we looking at Sweden in this very idealized way? Has Sweden got it right? Has Sweden engaged the public, engaged the householders to do the right thing? Or is this a bit of a myth with us?
Well, there has been a Swedish program against litter running for 40 or 50 years, at least as long as I can remember. I don't think you should idealize Sweden, but still, I think also part of the explanation could be that the municipal waste management has a high degree of incineration, so you really get rid of it and it doesn't end up in landfills. And then maybe you could think that this should be recycled instead, but that's the way Sweden has solved it. And I know that that's not an alternative in the UK, but at least I think we've got our flaws as well.
Excellent. Sorry, a bit of soul searching there. Did you want to add anything to that, Johan, or you are?
No, you started off picking up Michael Clark's question. He has actually a question further down the line where he is talking about that he has been traveling on the Mekong River and was appalled by the pollution that he sees, and then he's asking for what the packaging specifiers do on a global basis, and that's something that I think my partner in crime could elaborate on, because I think he's raising a very important question here.
It is. Can we just hold that one? Do you mind? Because I think that's quite specific. And I want to bring in Richard, because you talked about the cup scheme. Part of the cup scheme is people returning cups to coffee shops. Absolutely not going to discuss the current situation because it's bloody awful out there. But prior to the pandemic, were people bringing cups back to coffee shops? Were they engaging in that scheme? And I think we suspect we know what some of the answer is here. How do we get over that hurdle? How do we encourage them to do the right thing?
Yeah, I think you've got to show, one of the things we can do is show people a solution. and demonstrate that and actively market that there is a solution there which helps. But you've got to make it easy for people. And yes, there's been a lot of success in increasing the amount of coffee cups that are recycled. There's still an awful lot more that aren't recycled, and we all know that. I think there's been some great schemes. Actually, Hubbub, a charity, has worked with a number of, worked with us, but worked with waste management companies and worked with a number of coffee retailers to put on the street collection. So a particularly good scheme in Leeds, where people could actually put their coffee cups in bins on the street, and then they would be recycled and actually came back to our mill. So, putting infrastructure in place, people buy a coffee to take away. They're not necessarily then going to take that cup back to the shop. You've got to actually find locations where people can easily recycle. So I think we've made a lot of progress, but there's an awful lot more that we need to do there to make it easier. I mean, that's apart from saying, well, can you actually, have a different material that doesn't have plastic in there, or can you use reusables? Of course, they're all part of the mix.
And it's also, I think you're referencing there, we need to make it easier for the consumer, and that fits into something Dick Searle has asked. Dick, if anybody out there doesn't know who Dick Searle is, just to let you know that he runs the Packaging Federation, and he says, a consumer quote, "I do my bit for the environment by recycling my packaging. The global greenhouse, the GHG impact of packaging in the food and drink supply is 3%, whilst that of the products it contains is round about 70%. So the question here is the focus on hysteria surrounding packaging undermining the message for consumers to take action on a far greater carbon impact like food waste, home heating, car use, etc.? If so, what does the wider supply chain need to do to educate consumers on what's really important? Who would like to take that? As always, Dick asks some very pertinent questions here, but difficult ones to answer in the time.
Well, I can answer in a slightly different way, which Dick would expect me to do, no doubt. I think the one thing is, of course, at government level, when you're putting in policy and you're trying to establish what the priorities are, and this is a global initiative, and that's the first point on collaboration, is how do we actually truly collaborate in that way? But I think we need to do our bit, regardless of how big we are or impactive on that total position. I think every aspect of society, and because we're quite a visible part of society, I think it is important we still endeavour as an industry to do things around carbon reduction. So I still think it's still relevant that we're doing things. Are we going to solve and turn the dial on our own? No, not at all. But there's nothing better than outside in thinking and understanding what other people are doing, and understanding, is there something idea I can take from there and actually utilize that and make that relevant for my industry or my supply chain? And I think the more that we do collaborate and think in that sort of broader context, rather than I'm not the problem, somebody else can deal with it, then I think that's probably the wrong attitude, and we're never going to solve climate change. And there is a limited amount of time, for what I understand and have read, in that we really do need to deal with this. And this is not something that we can continue to just debate, as we've done for probably the last 20, 30 years. But we've actually got to get on, and some of that needs to happen grassroots up. So every small piece that happens, and apologies, it is my dog in the background, who's obviously hungry. So every small business collectively, needs to think about how they do theirs, and it's not just reliant on the bigger companies within any industry. And I think that's the same of all contributors towards climate change. It's every aspect of our life.
So thank you, and it's good that you bring your dog into work, Helen.
I know.
It's terrific. David, you said don't give a hoot. I said I wouldn't requote it, but I've done, about consumers. Are we giving up on trying to educate consumers in answer to, you know, Dick's question? Is education
well, I mean,
the right word?
You know, firstly, packaging and food, Dick's right, but of course packaging is not just about food, it's about lots of other products as well. So no, of course we don't give up about educating our consumers, and through your advertising, your companies are educating your consumers every day of the minute of the day, every day of the week. And we are pushing messages across to consumers all the time. What my point was is that you can educate consumers to do more or less what you want. Here we are, we're all closed in our doors, in our homes. Unthinkable a year ago, 2 years ago, unthinkable that you would be able to close 80% of the population, 90% of the population down.
True, true.
We've done that. We've done that. So you think it's that hard to educate people properly to do recycling? No, it's not. But my point is, it's actually a goddamn waste of time and money until you've got all the systems right. And you need to invest to get all the systems right. Here in the UK, we have a waste management system which is not fit for purpose. It's obsolete. It's been out of date for the last 20 years. We have recycling systems which from one council to another are completely unrecognizable. We have a mobile population for whom we don't account. How do you expect people to recycle? Nevertheless, we still do a reasonable job. We still have 45% recycling in this country. We could actually have 70 or 80% as the better performing areas of Europe do. But you need to have the infrastructure, and that requires capital investment. It requires EPR, DRS, all these things which the audience won't understand, but taxes to make it pay. The one thing that we do not have at the moment in the UK is money in our waste management system. Compared to most of other advanced Western European economies, we spend, I believe, between 30 and 40% per capita less. And that is the reason why we're struggling. And we export our waste to Malaysia, to Turkey, across the channel to be burnt in Amsterdam, etc. Because we don't have the capital for the infrastructure investments which we need. So forget about the consumers until we get that right.
And I presume you're going to say we need, and don't answer this, but just the point is we need to give those investors the confidence they're going to get something back for their money. Otherwise, what is the point for them? Let me ask a question to Richard, Stefan and Johan. It's from Keith Greatbatch, and apologies for not knowing Keith's company, but with most, if not all, packaging users increasing their sustainability targets to include more recycled material content, what is the panel's view on availability of these materials? Is there or will there be enough to go around and therefore keep prices down? I imagine Helen might want to contribute to this one as well when the others have spoken. It is an issue, isn't it? So Richard, do you want to start us on this one? Because you are actively seeking material to recycle.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly. I mean, you know, we have a lot of companies we supply are requesting more recycled content. And sometimes that's actually part of the law in certain parts of the world. California, for example, they require 40% post-consumer waste within their packaging. And yes, I mean, I think particularly something we're seeing, of course, during the pandemic with shortages of supply sometimes of recycled content. I think from our perspective, again, it's about perhaps finding sources of supply that previously have not been recycled or upcycled or used for, well, in our instance, for paper. So, you know, one of our key strategies is identifying new sources of material that we can use, not just post-consumer, but also what we call post-industrial. So offcuts from manufacturing processes, for example. So, yeah, I think what you have found is some of the traditional sources such as office waste, photocopier paper, de-inked office waste. There's a lot of demand for that, increasing demand. But what we find quite often is on our doorstep, if we can identify those materials and put the investment in, and I'm agreeing with other panelists here, it's not just about our investment, but it's the investment in the collection of those materials as well. Then you know, I think that's what we need to do. We need to just identify other sources of materials and find the collection systems for bringing those back and then recycling.
And Stefan and Johan, again, just material prices, particularly recycled material prices.
Recycled material prices are, I mean, in general, I think there needs to be an understanding that if you are to include recycled material, then there needs to be a source of that material originally. And in our case, as opposed to plastics, paper is not recyclable that many times. After a while, and I'm sure Richard can agree to that, after a while you can't really use it. The fiber gets too sort of deteriorated or damaged, so it doesn't work for paper making. So I mean, so you can't recycle them infinitely, which means that there needs to be a steady supply of fresh fiber as well. And so in sometimes I think that it's a bit, some companies are a bit naive, saying that for this and this specific type of packaging, we would like to have it based only on recycled material, when that specific packaging is a very good example of where you should use fresh fibers instead. And by that, first you protect the goods, you make sure that it's a clean and so on product, and then next step you are providing fresh material to the recycling industry as well. There are plenty of areas in Asia where you see that there is a clear lack of fresh fiber material, where they instead have to use a lot of chemistry in order to keep that paper together when they're manufacturing the paper of fibers that are so damaged that they don't really stick together. Normally when you make paper, you just use the fibers to connect to each other. You don't have to use a lot of chemistry for that. So I think that you need to recognize that without someone buying new cars, there will be no used car sales. And it's the same little bit here. There needs to be fresh fiber packaging or fresh fiber usage, and then you need to think about for what should we use fresh fibers. And really think about that, and where it's used, not feel ashamed that we can't use recycled fiber, but instead be aware, make a conscious choice and say, for this I choose fresh fibers with a good conscience, and then I feed that material into the recycling loop for Richard and others to take care of.
And Helen, I mean, plastic prices, you might actually want to explain what's happening to plastic prices currently, and particularly the global demand for certain recycled plastics. And of course, not every type of plastic can be recycled to food grade standards. Do you want to just cover a little bit of that ground, because the audience may not be aware of all of those particular issues?
I think it's similar to cartonboard in that respect. You know, availability of recycled materials. If I start with rPET, which is, you know, the material that you often mostly see in water bottles and elsewhere, that sort of clear plastic, you've seen a significant uptake and interest in driving recycled content into that material and using rPET as opposed to virgin over the last few years. And availability has not kept up. The supply of that material has not kept up. So accordingly, it's had an impact on pricing. And the pricing has grown over the last 5 years as a result. The good thing about that is it means that there's more value in it, which means you're more likely to invest. And you can see more growth in people providing that investment to grow the supply. But clearly it's still playing catch up. So there's this sort of supply and demand driven pricing. And then that's the case for rPET. If you look at the other sort of key materials, certainly, you know, the polypropylenes and polyethylenes, which are two other common materials used in food packaging, there's a very limited supply. And in fact, on polypropylene, there's no legal route yet. And that's not driven technically. There are some legislation that's around, you know, from the EFSA and the FSA around safety, and someday that will be solved, and that will become available food grade, but there are plenty of other approaches where you can recycle those materials into other non-food usage, non-food packaging or other industry sectors. But clearly there's a need to drive more supply. Comes back to David's point on getting the right systems, and I'm not just saying from a UK perspective, but it's actually a European perspective here, because many of those materials are being burnt at the moment, and that might be the right thing environmentally for some of the materials, but to get more recycling and use that material again, clearly there's a drive across Europe and not just in the UK.
Thank you, Helen. And here's a question from M. I don't know the first name, M. Single. The Single-Use Plastic Directive, and this is for David initially, Section 3 states that all polymers are plastics. How can this be the case? It's got your name written all over this one, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, you know,
you planted it.
M from MI6. It's a damn good question, and we're still trying to answer it. And of course, the principle is that regardless of the polymer that you use, you will be making a product which may be littered, and therefore the material used should be irrelevant. It should be the product put out of the market, because that is a danger to the environment. And in fact, the Single-Use Plastic Directive puts out of the market or restricts the market for certain products. And it says, you know, if you use any type of plastic, whether it's biodegradable or not, and you're making that product, your market will be restricted. So it has a logic to it. Of course, what it doesn't say, and what the people who are making materials like our members that are compostable, that can go back to composting, and in the UK, roughly about a third of them at the moment do, is that you can use those materials where you have food stuck to them. For example, imagine you're selling hamburgers in a football stadium, or you're selling cups of coffee in a football stadium, and you have, you know, 50,000 people throwing your cups away. Unlikely you're going to be able to recycle those cups and boxes because they're all stuck with food and drink, but you could compost them. And this is what happened in the 2012 Olympics. Now, under the Single-Use Plastic Directive, of course, a lot of those materials will be banned. What does that mean? It means probably that actually there's going to be more stuff thrown away. There's going to be more disposal. There's going to be less reuse. There's going to be less recovery. So I know my friends in Brussels and myself, we're all working on trying to turn some of these things around. That's the way it is at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a question from the longest question of the night, so I'll try and paraphrase it. This is from Peter McQueen, who is the course leader and senior lecturer, apprenticeship packaging professional BSc, Sheffield Hallam University, which he says is only 178 years old. And that is actually who he is, and that's taken all of that time. So let's give it a go here. He says, given we're facing growing pressure from an aging population, so it's good to have a sort of different perspective here, it's extremely likely that the packaging industry is going to need to respond to the issues that this will create, from accessibility, openability, visual communication, and maintaining long-term preservation. So, do any of the panelists see significant action happening in the industry to take this into account? And do you think that this could lead to tension between the desire to produce packaging that is perceived as environmentally sustainable? It's good to get a different take, and he's managed to squeeze in a sustainability into the question. And I am aware that Sheffield Hallam has done a lot of work on accessibility, openability of packaging, and I think that's how I've put it, particularly doing trials in the NHS. Does anybody want to, any of you, I mean, you can be forgiven if you haven't actually, by the way, thought about this issue of openability and whether this might go against, you know, we might get a solution for openability, but it's not sustainable, but we've got to meet the needs of the older population. I'll take a breather there and a sip of water. Right.
Martin, I can kick off. I don't think it's an either or, and it's, you know, they're not totally discrete from each other. I think designers are incredibly adept at managing multiple different requirements for when you're designing packaging, and it shouldn't be any excuse that you have to give up on one of those aspects, hugely important, whether it's the environment or whether it's the accessibility and usability. At the end of the day, the product's got to be, or the packaging's got to be fit for purpose. And you shouldn't have to balance out those two for one against the other, is the short answer.
And Richard, I know you are very high-end perfume packaging. I've had the Crocker story, but is this an area you thought of and given attention to?
I not really. I think on the paper side, we're providing paper to packaging converters and packaging designers. Of course, we have another arm to our business, which is the molded fiber, molded pulp, where we are supplying packaging. So whilst we haven't, I wouldn't say we've explicitly thought about this. Again, I just pick up on what Helen said. I think some of the designers that we work with are very adept at finding problems to lots of solutions. So I don't, in my experience, I definitely don't think this is an either or. And I also, I don't know if this was the point of the question, but I think it doesn't matter, I think, which age group or demographic people come from. I mean, I think sustainability is something that's high on everybody's agenda. We don't find particularly it's just a younger generation or an older generation.
Right,
So,
thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Bruce Funnell of Nestle. Unless we recover the same amount of material that we produce, this is like an exam question, isn't it? Unless we recover the same amount of material that we produce, we will have accumulation. What do the panel see needs to happen to address this balance, and how? Now we have 8 minutes left, so who would like to take this one? Is this one you could take a look at, David? You look like you're almost...
Yeah, I mean, there's an opportunity here for renewable materials which go in a soil-to-soil circular loop. This sounds very confusing, but essentially you take things out of the soil, you use them, you put them back to soil. You use those as a basis then to grow new things. Well, trees are the #1 material of circular loop. We've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years, taking trees out of the ground, using them to make paper, and planting new trees as a renewable resource to make more paper. And compostable materials grown from cornstarch or whatever, collect food waste, put the food waste back to soil to grow more to handle that food waste. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity here for what we call the circular bioeconomy. Using renewable raw materials to make materials that then go back to soil. Now, of course, you can't do that for everything. Otherwise, you'd have the whole of Europe just making cornstarch for materials. And so you will have, of course, the need for materials coming from aluminium, glass, plastic, etc. The key, I think, is to work on ensuring that those materials are collected and put back into the systems. There's also a great role to be made in prevention and refill and reuse systems.
And I've put that in big letters, I'll mute myself. Stefan, do we need to recover all paper which is placed on the market?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because, I mean, right now they are discussing, in Europe we are recovering about 70% of the paper materials. And at the same time, there are discussions in Brussels saying that should we go for 90% instead in the name of the holy circularity. The problem we have today, as was recently demonstrated in a study by Yale University and University College London, is that the global recycling paper industry is fueled to a very high part of fueled by fossil fuels. So what they pointed out is that we may increase the recycling rate, but we may not be doing the climate a service that way. It might even go around the other way. It might be bad for the climate. Now, the solution is, of course, not to stop recycling. It is about actually changing the energy strategy of the recycling industry, and that might be a problem for them due to the local energy mix where they are. But it is an interesting dilemma for the future.
Thank you. We're going to try and squeeze one question in here, and then we will have to wrap up. Tony Mash, can the implementation of novel technology move us to a different level? Some years ago, polymerization with carbon dioxide was seen as a viable way forward for creating a circular economy, and there is lots of new stuff around and potentially new stuff around, and lots of investment in new materials. I'm not sure which of you to take it, because I know I'm looking at David on certainly the new bio materials which are being researched. I mean, does that answer Tony's question?
I think there's a broader piece across all materials, Martin, in all industries. You know, whether you're in canning, whether you're in cardboard or plastics, there's always this, you know, ongoing research to improve material usage. That's just, you know, the drivers within our industries, and makes commercial sense, but also perhaps some of the drivers for why we're doing that and what the implications are from an environmental perspective. We might be changing our views as we learn more, but that research is fundamental to all of our industries.
And the suggestion is there is a little bit of the way of go. I can see Peter back on screen, so we're now talking about wrapping up. I'm going to ask each of you individually, if you had one wish that could be granted and which would make, in your opinion, a major improvement with regard to sustainability, and it's going to be short, it's like the end of any questions, they always have that final one in there. What would that be? Richard, if you could have one wish that could be granted, what would it be?
I think it's been referred to already, but I think a coordinated approach to the waste management and investments in that companies could take advantage of in the recycling and upcycling. That would be my one wish.
All right, Stefan, what's your wish?
Unmute is the word of the day. Anyway, I wish that more packaging designers were aware of the climate implications of their choice of materials. I meet so many designers, and I say to them, look at the figures and the facts behind this, and you realize that the most important decision you will make in your lifetime for the climate is the choice of material.
Thank you. And David?
I studied economics, and I don't believe that anything functions unless you have the right amount of money in place to make it function. This is not just about packaging or waste, this is generally speaking. And why we're in such a mess environmentally around the world is that we put our money into the wrong things, into destruction rather than regeneration. So my wish, when I'm in charge and president of the world, is that all our products, all our materials, all our activities will have the price of the environmental destruction that they cause priced into them. So a ton of plastic might cost £3,000, you know, and that would pay for cleaning up the mess.
Okay, and Johan, your final wish?
Yeah, I am actually on the same note as David is. I wrote here in front of me that the price of CO2. We need to give fossil CO2 the correct price. That will change energy. It will change packaging. It will change basically everything. If we could, if the price of using fossil CO2 was on the level of the problems it's causing us. So I think that, I mean, there's a price now of the European trade of emissions, where you have a price which is on record high right now of emitting fossil carbon dioxide, but that price needs to go up. That would spark a lot of new business as well.
Thank you, Johan. And finally, Helen.
I thought I'd better mute first. I think for me, nothing small. I would like some leadership in thought and consistency in application. And if we can have a more systematic approach and simplify things, I think we do overcomplicate things terribly.
Thank you very, very much, all five of you. And it's brilliant, really, because the last question really ties everything together and summarizes effectively what's gone on before. So thank you for that. I'm about to hand over to Peter, but before I do so, I'd just like to thank Peter and thank Lucy for bringing us all together. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you as well for being great panelists. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, so I would like to thank Martin, Helen, Richard, David, Staffan and Johan on your behalf for their really stimulating contributions and insights into packaging sustainability. I have really, really enjoyed the discussions and the presentations this evening. I hope you have. And as Martin said, we also need to thank Lucy, who's kept this moving quite smoothly for the evening. As I mentioned earlier, the Stationers Company is still going strong after more than 600 years. And this is due to the ongoing commitment of our members. In this fast and ever-changing world, the Stationers Company continues to be the link from the past to the future. If anyone is interested in learning more about our company, or potentially joining us and helping it to continue as a strong and active company, we would welcome your interest. You can check out the company via our website or get in touch directly if you wish to. Also, a plug for our next event on the 3rd of March, Trust and the Media, where we'll be exploring how startups and entrepreneurs in the media, publishing and digital world use stories to build their brand and business. And finally, if you are not aware, the Stationers Company Annual Innovation Awards for 2021 have been launched, and the closing date for applications is the 14th of April. These Innovation Awards celebrate innovation across all our industries, and it's open to all. Thank you again, panelists, stationers and guests, and I wish you all a good evening.